Hey all, PyroDrake here with the OAnalysis for the penultimate episode for Part 1, titled Empire of Light. If I were to sum up this episode in one word, it would probably be consequences. A lot of what this episode does is show the consequences that came from choices the characters had made. Let's get into it and I'll show you what I mean. Our episode opens with OA laying in her bed dreaming. Her dream culminates into a gun firing, startling her awake. Her screaming and crying wake Nancy and Abel. Abel tells Nancy to stay put as he grabs his gun and heads to OA's room.
Everything's okay.
As Abel sits with OA, she asks him if he's mad at her.
Mad at you? For what?
Running away.
Abel doesn't answer, but we can tell by his gaze it's something he's at least thought of. OA explains that she thought she'd be back within a couple of days, and she hoped he understood the note.
I forgot about the note.
The next day, OA tells the dream to Rahim, the FBI therapist.
It's a big space. The ceilings are really high. There's a lot of glass.
She feels that if she can solve the puzzle of the premonition on time, she can avert a great deal of pain. However, she doesn't have a clue where to start. Instead of thinking of her as crazy, Rahim tries to help her understand where her premonitions come from. She mistakes his intentions by implying it's due to anxiety or stress.
Nothing so reductive. I'm just wondering if your subconscious is trying to help you out.
He also brings up a theory for psychic ability.
What if psychic just means your mind is able to pick up on even the subtlest cues in the world around you?
Suggesting that everyone is constantly gaining information, and these dreams are her way of processing that information.
I'm trying to prepare myself for the mission.
He then suggests that her best course of action may be to just evaluate where she is now and start from there. While Rahim and OA talk, Nancy and Abel sit in the lobby. This is Nancy's first time coming to OA's appointments, and she scolds Abel for not walking in OA previously.
Yes, dear. Did Prairie leave a note?
The question takes Nancy off guard for a moment. As she declines knowing anything about a note, OA merges with Rahim. Nancy asks if she can talk to him alone, but Rahim suggests that they just all talk together. Nancy then asks if he knows about what happened the previous night.
No, what happened?
We already know OA and Rahim spoke about her dream, so it's clear he just wants to hear how Nancy will tell it, and the look OA gives him is great. As Nancy starts to bring up some medication they were given years ago, OA begins to fidget insecurely, but Rahim stops her to remind them he isn't a doctor and has no say regarding medications. After telling them his only role is as a victim specialist, he makes a very interesting point I hadn't really considered up until now.
You guys are victims too. I mean, you've suffered tremendously. Just making it through the day right now, it's a huge achievement for all of you.
I'm going to put a pin in this for now, and I'll get back to it at the end of the video. Moving on, he suggests they do something together as a family, like, for example, go out to eat together, as this may help normalize all their lives. Nancy looks genuinely grateful, and as they bid farewell to Rahim, he takes OA by surprise.
See you tomorrow, OA.
I mentioned in my OA analysis for Champion. Now, at one point or another, I say, I love this character, for pretty much everybody in the show at one point or another. This is where I first said, I love Rahim. Speak of the devil, the next scene opens as the bell rings, and we have Steve and Angie still sitting in class. She tells him she's finishing up some personal projects she's working on, and Steve asks to see it. She agrees, pulls the headphone jack out, and plays the video she was working on.
Here at the alternative school, you can pick your subjects and work at your own pace. Pretty neat. Shall we get started? Fuck me, the butt, 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 fuck me, the butt. Great job! Click the button at the bottom of the page to
Are you gonna dump pig's blood on my head at prom?
No, unless you think that's hot.
So this obviously places Steve in a great mood as he meets up with the others on their way to the house. As they walk, he sees Buck eating a protein bar that he got from French. At the mention of French's name, Steve kinda withdraws a bit as there's still some obvious tension between the two of them. Despite this, the six of them still joke, banter, laugh, and relate to each other like family. The The whole point of their conversation over this minute-and-a-half scene just shows how close they've all become since meeting OA. After they're all settled in at the abandoned house, OA asks Steve if he can start them off with a second movement.
Alright, everybody take a deep breath in. And then go and fuck yourselves.
As the group practices, Steve goes around to help them with their form. You can tell he puts aside any ill will he may harbor for the sake of the movements.
Like you got rope around your wrist and you want to, like, break it, you know?
Welp, things seem to be going pretty well for Steve. Let's see how we can fuck things up for him. After practice, Steve finds his father in the kitchen waiting for him. Apparently, he was on the phone with Miles Breckoff's mom, you know, the kid Steve punched in the throat in episode 1. Through social media, she found out it was Steve that injured her son. To prevent a lawsuit, Mr. Winchell forked over $5,000 for Miles' medical bills.
Alright, let me take a shower. I'll get my thoughts in order and then we can talk this out, alright?
Back at the abandoned house, Betty is helping OA clean up as they talk about how she's hesitating cashing the check she received from her brother's life insurance policy, as to her it's almost like a piece of him. OA gives Betty some comforting words that she received herself from Raheem. Their conversation progresses to the details of opening the portal to another dimension.
Will this be dangerous? I don't know that I'm ready to go to another dimension.
Oh, I don't think it's like that. Like an invisible river that carries you away.
Kinda contradictory from what she told Steve in Champion,
So this is dangerous.
but I guess she just doesn't want to scare Betty. Back at the Winchell residence, Steve finished up his shower and appears to have his thoughts in order, and he appears genuinely remorseful for his actions.
I was stupid. I'm trying to take responsibility. I'll pay it back, I promise.
Steve comes downstairs, ready to talk things through, but is caught off guard by a couple of military-esque guys talking with his parents.
Let's go. We're on a schedule.
These are the guys from Asheville, ready to collect Steve. They literally drag him out of the house and throw him in their van just as Betty passes by to witness the entire thing. Betty follows their van and calls Principal Gilchrist. Evidently, it was him that found the post and contacted Steve's parents. Betty tells him he should have stayed out of it as that punch happened before.
Before what?
That was before we met at the house. I mean,
Betty realizes she crossed the line and attempts to backpedal out of it. When she fails that, she makes the best excuse ever to hang up a call.
I gotta go. I'm eating a sandwich.
Gilchrist, knowing she's hiding something, tries to get it out of her.
Betty. Betty.
It's BBA.
What?
I love BBA. While all of this is going on, OA and the Johnsons appear to have taken Raheem's advice as they arrive at a restaurant as a family. As they walk in, OA gets a strange look from another patron. For the first time in the show that I can remember, the three of them finally appear as just a normal family. As they reminisce, they bring up a boy Prairie used to date.
I don't think he liked me.
He liked you. Of course he liked you.
I mean, maybe he liked that I couldn't see him.
That funny little mustache thing.
Things are going great, so that could only mean they're going to turn very sour very quickly. As they talk, the girl that stared at OA when they walked in comes up and takes a selfie with her. Nancy protests, but the girl sits down and takes a couple of pictures anyways. Before finally leaving them in peace, she says,
To be beaten like that and raped, I can't even imagine.
This interaction, understandably, upsets Nancy, and she wants to go over there and force her to delete the photo. As Nancy gets more flustered, Abel calls over a waiter in an attempt to get the night back on track. It just so happens that the waiter he calls over is French. OA's stare at French gives me a please help me vibe, but I feel French doesn't quite know how yet. Meanwhile, the thugs that took Steve away stop at a gas station. While Craig, the smaller guy, pumps the gas, the other guy, Jason, brings Steve inside and tells him he can grab something to drink, but doesn't bother to release his hand restraints. While Jason orders and hits on the cashier, BBA approaches Steve with a plan to get him out of their custody. She instructs Steve to tell him that he has to pee. She placed an out-of-order sign on the bathroom door, so they'll have to take him behind the store. Once there, no matter how embarrassing it is, Steve is to yell, "They're molesting me." Meanwhile, BB-8, as a casual outsider, will back Steve up and get him out of Asheville's hands. She asks Steve if he understands the plan.
Yeah, I say they're touching my dick and you come and get me.
Oh, don't say it like that. Because it sounds like it's your fantasy and you're making it up.
Once outside, Steve begins to put BB-8's plan into action by telling the thugs he has to go. They remove and rebind Steve's hand restraints to in front of him, and he takes him to the side of the building. Moments later,
That man is molesting that boy! He's molesting him!
unfortunately, it appears her lack of confidence in what she's saying doesn't get any outside attention at all. It doesn't help that Steve isn't saying anything to back her up. The two Asheville guys write her off as nuts, throw Steve into the back of the van, and begin to drive away. Betty then runs in front of their van yelling,
I have something you'll want!
What do you have?
as she pulls out the $50,000 cashier check from her brother's life insurance and tells them they can have it so long as they let Steve go. After examining the check, the thugs agree to the deal. Betty opens the door, Steve jumps out. Craig and Jason are never heard from again. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Nancy still wants the girl from before to delete the picture she just took. Her main point of contention is that the girl could post Prairie's photo online, and anyone that sees it could imagine horrible things being done to her. Nancy has finally reached her tipping point.
I don't even know. I don't know anything.
And she finally asks,
Who did that to you?
OA finally thinks it's time to tell Nancy the truth as she knows it. She tells her the scars on her back are self-inflicted and that there are 2 parts of 5 notations needed to open a portal to another dimension. Finally, she finishes with,
I know because I am the original angel.
Whenever I watch this episode, I can almost feel that slap. As the entire restaurant looks on, French offers OA an escape.
You need to get out of here, OA.
I love French. After leaving the restaurant, French and OA head to the abandoned house. Before going in, however, French tells OA he has something on his mind. He goes through every aspect of her story, from childhood, growing into an adult, being captured by Hap, and the new family she made in Hap's basement. Throughout all of that, the one aspect of her life she never talked about was Nancy and Abel. According to OA, she left them out because they medicated her for years and even said,
They thought I was crazy. They're not my parents.
As they're talking, BB-8's car approaches, parks in front of the house, and Steve jumps out yelling for OA. Seeing this, OA and French follow Steve inside. As Steve yells for her, she makes it up the stairs to him. In his anger, he tells OA that his parents had him kidnapped and that he's calling bullshit on her story. He feels OA is only using them to get to Homer and how she'd have no use for them if it wasn't for that. OA asks Steve to calm down and tries to hug him, but he stumbles backwards and falls down to the floor. Slowly, she comes close and puts her arms around him.
Saw me do some fucking flips without this guy. No.
Steve grabs a pencil that's laying on the ground and stabs it into OA's leg. As everyone looks on, not even this breaks OA's embrace. Steve drops the pencil, finally embraces OA, and as a tear runs down his cheek, he asks,
How did you survive so long down there?
I survived because I wasn't alone.
And the episode ends with OA saying,
Tonight I will finish telling my story. Are you ready?
So this is the only episode where OA isn't telling the Crestwood Five her story. So instead of asking if she's telling the truth, I want to briefly focus on the title of the episode, Empire of Light. The Empire of Light is a series of paintings by René Magritte. Each painting depicts a single house under a blue sky with scattered clouds. The houses are surrounded by trees and have a light post in front of them. The house, the surrounding trees, and the lit light post all imply it's nighttime, yet the sky is always clear and blue as if it would be during the day. This conflicting information can be unsettling and cause uneasiness. This also brings up questions for light versus dark. Can light or goodness exist without darkness or evil? Do the two always press against each other? Does the darkness push up against the light, or does the light threaten to remove the darkness? As a side note, the box and posters for the 1973 film The Exorcist was inspired by these paintings. Anyway, for the sake of this episode, the meaning behind using Empire of Light as its title can mean different things. Personally, I like to think of it as two sides for OA herself. In her conversation with French at the end, it seems there are times with the Johnsons that would be considered in the darkness.
They medicated me. They thought I was crazy. They're not my parents.
While her time with the other captives, and with the Crestwood Five especially, is the light. I also think this is why it means so much to her when Raheem tells her,
See you tomorrow, OA.
Speaking of that scene with Raheem, there are dots on the wall behind him from a sign or something that once hung there. According to Reddit and a couple other online sources, these dots form the name Rachel in Braille. Not much I can say about this right now, I just thought it's an interesting tidbit. Finally, there's one more thing I want to mention here. For the first few episodes, I was pretty hard on Nancy. I felt she was controlling, manipulative, and completely unable to trust her own daughter. It wasn't until I was writing the script that I realized something that put all of that into perspective.
You guys are victims too. I mean, you've suffered tremendously. Just making it through the day right now, it's a huge achievement for all of you.
It really didn't occur to me that OA wasn't the only one that suffered when she got taken. I'm not saying I support Nancy's choices, just that I understand a bit better as to where she's coming from. Next, I want to talk about Steve. At the beginning of the show, Steve seems very angry and upset nearly constantly. Now that he has friends he feels he can count on and trust, his entire demeanor and outlook have changed. We can see that OA putting him in charge of helping teach the movements meant a lot to him, and can even prepare him for a leadership-type role. To him, however, his parents completely betrayed him by calling Asheville. This break of trust from his own parents is what caused him to lash out at OA near the end. He feels that if his own parents would do that to him, then there's no chance anyone else would ever be on his side. It's not until OA shows him unconditional love that he finally realizes and accepts her, and the rest of the Crestwood Five, as closer than even his own family. Speaking of Steve, I just want to touch on BBA's plan to get Steve back and why Steve didn't go along with it. At this point, Steve feels hurt and betrayed, so I think he just didn't know who or what to believe. There's definitely some embarrassment from yelling, "I'm being molested," so I'm sure that didn't help either. I believe there was more than one reason for him not going along with it. Intentional or not, had Steve gone along with it, these two men who are doing the job that they're getting paid for would probably get fired, and having a molestation accusation, even a fake one, could prevent them from getting any job in the future. Had Steve gone along with it, they would have literally ruined these two guys' lives. I'm not saying what they do is right by any means. I just think having them registered as sex offenders is a relatively large punishment. Regardless, they were probably fired anyways. They had papers signed by Steve's parents signing him up for Asheville. So what they've physically done to Steve, for the most part, is fair game. What I'm sure is a different story is, quote-unquote, losing Steve. We, the audience, know BBA and Steve, but Jason and Craig certainly don't. As far as they know...
No, man, she's fucking insane.
And they leave Steve in her care without even asking him if he knows her. What do they tell their boss when they're expected to show up with a kid? Furthermore, what do they tell his parents? Some random lady gave me a check for 50 grand, so I sold your son to her. Yeah, I'm sure that would go over real well. Finally, though it's a cashier's check, it can still be flagged as lost or stolen. It's not easy to cancel a cashier's check, but it can be done by the issuing bank and be reissued after 90 days. If she contacts the bank and tells them the check is lost and or stolen, these guys are going to be in serious trouble if they try to cash it then. So, the last thing I want to touch on is the announcement that we won't be getting a Part 3. Personally, I think this is outrageous, especially given the positive reviews Part 2 had gotten. I'm not sure if it will change anything, but I left a link in the description for a Change.org petition to request Netflix to renew the OA for Season 3. And I would strongly recommend signing it if you haven't already. For the time being, I'm not going to say much more on this topic. As I progress through the series, there's obviously going to be fewer and fewer spoilers to worry about. With this episode, I actually don't have anything to talk about that would be considered spoilers, so I'm just going to leave it at that. If you made it this far, thanks. I really appreciate it. Feel free to click like, subscribe, and the bell if you want to know when I post the next episode, and comment below if I missed anything or if you know how I can improve. Thanks again, and have a great day. Peace.